understanding a culture is really interesting, particularly now you're smashing a lot of cultures together in one place, in a workplace. To be able to kind of decipher from an individual and a collective point of view, no space behaves like a workplace. It's really the length of time that people spend in it, the goal to be productive in a space that can influence that productivity is such an interesting kind of concept. What is the best environment for people to thrive, and not just in their work? Thriving is about enjoying, it's about wellness, but the output is something that is excellent and is done well, and I think everyone's looking for that at the end of the day.
Hello, everybody that listeners. I'm actually at Unispace's headquarters in St Catherine's Dock, which is absolutely beautiful. Literally got like the river out here. The walk here, I got so zen and chilled. Just like plodding through, I was thinking, what am I getting for lunch after this?
Yeah, that's a good plan to have.
I'm chatting to Antonia Walmsley.
That's the one.
I got that. Yeah, certainly. Exactly right. I didn't know there's like some Maori.
So, no, it's actually English. So,
I'm the head of design, or head of strategy and design at Unispace Global. That's quite fancy, isn't it?
It sounds fancier than it is. I look after the European team, so but yeah, of course, my accent always throws people off a little bit. I'm on the wrong side of the world to be a European leader, but here we are.
Honestly, that happens a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Actually chatting to someone at the weekend and they were like, oh, you've got really South London accent. And I was like, cool. Like, but I don't actually hear accents anymore. Like, I think I'm so surrounded by them. I don't actually hear it. I'm like, just...
Yeah, and I think, I'm hyper conscious of my accent because a Kiwi accent is very, it's sort of distinctive, but not. But then also we have, there's a cadence to the way that we speak. So I've definitely adjusted it in the last 4.5 years that I've been in Europe to sort of make myself more understandable. I deal with so many different cultures in a day. My team consists of Italians, Spanish, Swiss, Polish, French, all of these. So yeah, it's important that I articulate myself.
That's great. And that does actually touch on something that I do think is really interesting, Naja. Am I saying this right?
Māori.
Once more.
Māori. Yeah, it has a rolled R in it. So, yeah.
I would never have actually known that.
Yeah.
It's got has it got dots above it or something?
Yeah, it has a little, I don't even know what it's called. And I'm sure it's basically the A is long. So above, so Maori, and Māori is so it's like a R. Grandma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So you've got Māori roots.
Yes, my mother is around about half Māori. So yeah. So yeah, it is an indigenous New Zealander.
That is cool, isn't it? It's
Oh,
cool.
still, it's great.
True.
Yeah, it's interesting. From a community point of view, it is a really interesting culture. And it's sort of it shapes a lot of my thinking, I think, in terms of where I may be on the other side of the world, but a part of sort of being a Māori is kind of being a part of the community. It's got such a heritage of storytelling and about sort of the philosophies around kind of caretaking and looking after the planet and looking after people. There's specific names for hospitality that in a really broad sense and things like that. So they have, in terms of kind of the myths and the legends that sit within the culture, it's a huge kind of, until Europeans came over, it was a very oral and kind of culture. There was no writing down, or anything like that. A lot of stuff, a lot of stories were expressed in craft and art and things like that, rather than the written word. So the Māori language now, the writing is actually based on the European who came over and wanted to write things down. So it's a really interesting thing to express sort of a story or a way of living in a non-written form, which is essentially what architecture and design. Exactly. So, I mean, I'm not sure whether it was ingrained in a really early age, but it was. I think it's just something that I find, and when I talk to other people, who are Maori, they have sort of that ability in the orator and the ability to kind of tell a story and to, you know, just describe something, but in a more, I guess, a poetic way. There's some words in Māori that don't really exist in the same way in English that, and there is a lot. I mean, over here, I realize there's a lot of those words that sit in Europe as well, but from the English point of view, that when New Zealand was colonized, it was sort of trying to translate words, but that as we've sort of moved on, we realize that some of those words are like, manaakitanga, which is essentially, in a very literal translation, is hospitality, but it actually, in a Māori sense, it means such a wider kind of idea. It's about looking after people and not just, the people who come to your house or your restaurant or something like that, but it's just a guardianship and an ability to sort of welcome people in no matter who you are, which involves a more of a community version of hospitality than an individual.
This is the amazing thing about having people from different parts of the world. Like I love cultures, and every culture has got a strength. As it's got a really like strong something, like whatever that is for different countries. And when you can find it and tap into it and lean into it, you find this whole like raft of whatever it is. And in this case, it's like the whole community and hospitality in a broad sense it's so something to embrace. It's so like, it's so strong. It's so brilliant.
Yeah. And I think some of these concepts that are ancient in kind of these cultures are actually things that thinking about nowadays is what everybody's looking for. It's not, when it isn't, they aren't new concepts, but I think sometimes we have cultures and people have become a lot more individual. So in terms of sort of harking back to that community in a more holistic way of talking about things is really interesting. I mean, for me particularly, and that sort of, I guess some guiding philosophies in terms of how I do my job. Yeah, and look after my team. Excited.
No, I love it. I'll definitely tap into that. But one thing I was going to say was, with that heritage, with that like kind of community, would you like been in those communities? Would you have been part of those? Would you have experienced that firsthand?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, historically, Maori culture in New Zealand, there were times where it was not, talked about and not sort of embraced. In the last, I'd say, 20 years, it's really come into the forefront of who New Zealand is as a people. I think people see the All Blacks playing rugby, but they do a haka at the beginning of it, and that is a really uniquely New Zealand thing. I mean, Tonga does it as well, and there's a few others, but it is an interesting kind of way of them embracing what is a very Māori thing to do, but bringing it into a mainstream element. And a lot of New Zealand journalists now speak Māori. There are words that have kind of become part of the dialogue, the dialect of New Zealand, and it become kind of a very Kiwi way of speaking. I did not learn Māori at school. It wasn't a really, I mean, you learnt the odd word and things like that. My younger brother, who the youngest of all of us, when he started, I guess, daycare, they had just brought in full immersion Māori daycare, so he went to Kohanga. He learnt Māori from the beginning. He then went on to kind of be in a full immersion Māori school, for his entire primary school learning. So he was speaking Māori more than he was speaking English, and so that got brought back home. And I'm very good at Māori commands. I know how, all those sorts, like put your socks on and close the door and get outside and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's probably the which is a shame that me and my other two sisters didn't really get that immersed in. But I look at my nieces and that sort of thing now, who are it's so part of the culture of New Zealand now. I guess Māoriness and that individual, and it is the an official language of New Zealand along with New Zealand Sign Language. It is something that's ingrained in it. I spent time on, the marae, which is basically my tribe or affiliation sort of space that we have. So, every it's where the rituals happen. It's where you meet. It's where you kind of, it is a really interesting community space. It centers around a house, and this is the thing with did a few papers back at university on Maori architecture and how the historic and kind of influence and what I guess Maori architecture means to Maori, because the wharenui they talk about it being an embodiment of the human, and they talk about the ridge being the spine, and that it's planted on the earth, and it has these kind of personification kind of descriptions to it, which is always something that's interested me. It's like it's this kind of how structure and architecture actually can be that personification of a community. It is kind of a focal point, which is it's always as kids running around, and you slept there, so in the back of the wharenui there's a mattress room, and kids would just jump off the mattress, and it is a kind of a part of growing up when you're a Māori New Zealand dip into that part. So
it's amazing. How does it shape how you actually translate it today? Like, you've got a team, you've got multiple cultures with working in your team, you mentioned. Yeah, and how do you feel like you might, how do you bring that in, either intentionally or unintentionally, I guess?
Yeah, what's interesting, because I was moving to Europe, and I originally lived in Amsterdam, so it was sort of one of those things where I was with the same company, but it was really a life change. That was I was looking for a bit of an kind of interesting life change after COVID and all of those things, cabin fever on an island, specifically. But I think I was a little nervous about coming over here, because I think New Zealanders inherently have a idea of Europe as being this sort of cultural center, and this sort of there's a real Europe is on a pedestal to kind of New Zealanders. So and it was where we looked to all the time for design for all these different kind of New Zealand is essentially 250 years old, whereas which is a baby compared to over here. So it was there was a certain level of nervousness, but I think once I got here, I think I inherently have a way with sort of, I am two cultures. I am I'm basically the United Nations, but I have an indigenous part of it. But I think I have a built-in empathy for a culture that isn't properly mine, and because I know what it sort of feels like to sort of be of a different culture and then integrate into different ways. It's so I also have a deep fascination of different cultures. So, like my team I love them all. They're amazing. But the nuances of speaking to an Italian team compared to a French team, compared to a Swiss team. And I think we have a habit of sort of doing a stereotype around different cultures and things like that. But I think the nuances, and I guess what we're doing, we're designing, so we all got a passion for a certain thing, but it manifests itself in a different way just because of how people articulate what it is, how their lived experiences, their cultures. And I find that probably one of the most exciting things about my job is to understand the perspective of a different culture, which I think is so interesting in this kind of very I guess, insular looking world sometimes, is that it's so nice to see the diverse perspective.
I do find that with any, like almost like the unifying point from anybody that's like done a big move, like overseas or anything, even if it's not distantly that far, but like had to move to like Italy, like compared to New Zealand, that's not that far, but still a huge cultural change. I feel like that one unifying thing is like having broken your safe bubble, if that's a word, and then going into this completely new like environment, having to learn everything and it being so different in one way or another to what you pictured and expected. And yeah, that one thing, oh my goodness, like you've done that move and like, how did you find this? And it's a kind of a unifying point. It's very interesting. Like regardless of the culture, there's always that like that leveling.
Yes. Yes, and it's really interesting because I know, hear a lot of Kiwis in London. There are a lot of Australians in London, and I get a lot of comments about, oh, you all kind of moved to Clapham and things like that. I have to say, I never probably encountered as many Kiwis as I thought, but I think it's because I operate at a sort of in a more European environment than a London environment, and because I was an Eps fan and things like that, I the expat idea is really interesting, and being an expat in a country, in a city like Amsterdam, so my friends are Chilean, my friends are Swedish. They're from Polish. They're from completely different places anyway, and it's interesting that the community that gets formed around that, and so again, it's sort of embracing a multicultural kind of idea in a place that isn't anyone's, is like, and that's what's so interesting is like, So I think because I'm used to being not the other culture or being kind of, there's an identification in my culture and what I do. So, and there's always that strive for for people to understand where I'm coming from. I think I have I guess, a switched on empathy to that from others, and that which makes it really interesting when you get expats in a completely different place and what that looks like. But yeah, it's a really fun practice.
Oh, it is. It's talking to someone who's made a great statement. I love this. Once you've done a move like that, everywhere's home, but nowhere's home.
Yes.
Because suddenly, like the whole world, like you could live anywhere, sort of thing, and then but then suddenly, like nowhere's home because you haven't got that like grounded, safe bubble anymore because you kind of left it. So it's like it was a really eye-opening. It was a really well put message because I do understand through my personal like journey, like what it's in some extent what it was like, and so yeah, it did pretty sort of everywhere's home, nowhere's home.
Yeah, and I think it's a really, New Zealanders are very like, we love our country. There is some real loyalty. So and I've had to speak to my friend. She was the CEO of Unispace in America, and she's a Kiwi, and a great friend of mine. But she was always, she said, since moving to New York, she's never been more loyal to New Zealand. Like she's got Deeply Pony, all of the brands and things like that. She's like, she's inherently got this kind of real, sort of, New Zealand is the best. This inbuilt, like, she's a big All Blacks fan. So, when they play in America, she's there. Like, there's this is kind of really, it got to the point. It's just like, I'm obsessed now, and I have that to an extent too. As this, not a rugby fan, but which makes me a very bad New Zealander. But
terrible,
I know. It's usually the first question I get asked when I'm at Europe is All Blacks, and I'm like,
Sheep must be. That's Tassie joke, isn't it?
I know,
It's actually for English people.
yeah, exactly. But I mean, I've probably been to more rugby games over here than I have in New Zealand. So that's exactly kind of, you have a much more, I guess, when you're in New Zealand, it's like, yeah, everything. And I guess you take it for granted. But the more I'm not there, the more I kind of say,
What's one thing you'd bring from there to Europe?
very controversial.
Cool.
The food.
I don't think that's controversial. I don't think I think whenever I talk to somebody from overseas, it's literally people and food that they mix.
Yeah.
So that's sometimes weather, but actually it's more food and people.
It's so interesting because again, in New Zealand we have a preconceived idea that everything in Europe is like the food, that but all of these kinds of things. But the more I've realized is that New Zealanders they travel a lot. They spend a lot of times overseas and then they come home. But they come home and bring the best bits. And that's what I find kind of interesting is my standard, well, I guess the kind of standard restaurant Italian is
In England.
In New Zealand
Yeah.
is amazing. And it's a combination of, it's a very, it's easy to grow things in that country. The produce and all of those things are amazing. But it's from a memory of someone who's gone overseas and come in and gone, I had the best thing I ever had in Tuscany, and that's what it is. Or I had the best kind of whatever I did in France. But it's the same as like Thai and, or like all of these people who go away and come back and they take the best of sort of what they had in that place and bring it back to New Zealand, which is a really interesting. I think it's a New Zealand type thing, and probably Australian as well, just about the amount we travel. And I think that also shapes the perception of New Zealanders off overseas as well. It's like people haven't travelled yet, but people bring back the stories, and they've seen, amazing things and that sort of thing. It shapes an impression, I think, that New Zealanders have of the rest of the world. And when we get here, it's not like it's disappointing. It's just not all that. And that's the thing is, it is, I think, when you're cherry picking the top of the bunch and you get all of this content, you get all of this sort of things, you kind of just assume that that's it. And I remember, in magazines, you get, in architecture magazines, I think I remember seeing something from John Pawson in an architecture magazine. I was like, like amazing, no services, like it's just like pristine, beautiful, minimalist type interiors. And then I went and saw it, and it wasn't that. It was one room, and the rest had, you saw sprinklers and you saw all these sorts of things. And I was like, So the filtered view that New Zealanders get of the world is, and I'm sure it's in other countries as well, but this is kind of my perception.
Lived experience.
Yeah, it is that everything is, you get that Instagram view of everything, and it's all just pristine, and people only take photos of the best bits.
And there's difference for going on holiday to living somewhere.
Definitely.
So if you've travelled to like Italy or whatever, and they come back and bought the best bits, you might have travelled.
Because you're only hitting the good bit. You're like, I need to go to, the Vatican, I need to go all of these places, but it's the in between and that's the bit I find is the most interesting, I think. I think that whole, it is the day today. It's in between.
You get very polarized views of anywhere. Like either it's absolutely amazing because they just do nothing all day and like just have fun, or they're literally sort of living in mud huts. It's like, well, actually, there's a completely middle road, which is like 99% of the day. In fact, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like the Pacific Island view. Is like there's resorts and then there's villages, and then it's just like people go to those Pacific Islands and you never see a village. And that's the thing. I did at university when I was studying architecture. We went to Samoa, and basically, everyone's like, that beautiful island. But we went and measured a church that had got damaged in a cyclone and things like that. So basically, we were in it. Like, we were in with, in the village called Manasi, and we were measuring a church, and it was sort of it was a much more community experience. But everyone I talked to about Samoa since going or before was all about, oh yeah, this great beaches and this resort and all of these sorts of things. And it's an interesting thing to see the way people who live there live rather than this kind of false resort kind of idea.
So it's so interesting, isn't it? But you did mention you touched quite lightly on the Maori culture and how the rituals you're saying about. Do you feel like you've picked up those like kind of rituals, routines in your day to day, like from that heritage?
I think, in a way, the philosophies about hospitality and guardianship of the environment and all of those things that sort of sit inherently in, I guess, who I am or my understanding of kind of the that community viewpoint. I think some of those rituals are definitely there, ingrained. It's like, it's funny to think about actually, because I think there's some things that I don't really think about. That
Would you say you're quite a structured person?
Oh,
Greek from like.
well, it's chaos. I think I am a very structured person. I enjoy. I like routine. I kind of have a very, a part of kind of who I am is I am quite, I have suffer from kind of anxiety disorders and things like that. And a part of that kind of cognitive therapy type of way of doing it is routine. So, I have the most, and from the outside, people are like, how do you know what you're doing? You're in Zurich one day, you're in New York the other, all of these kinds of things. But there's certain rituals within kind of those in-betweens that actually kind of allow that to happen, which I think I applied a lot to my life. And I think, I did art and I was creative and all of these sorts of things, but I kind of needed a backbone, and that's, behind that creativity, a way of sort of structuring it, I guess, channel and compartmentalize what I do and all of these sorts of things. Architecture is a very good version of that. It's like you have to be thinking about how you build something, but you really want to push the boundaries in terms of creativity. So it's an interesting kind of profession to have, and it's an interesting profession to lead. Is people who can be at any level of that spectrum. It could be very technical and talking about buildability and things like that, and then you've got people who are very creative and very prefer not to even think about that part of it, whereas I think I sit pretty squarely in the middle, and kind of a part of my routine is sort of helping people either end get to taking that burden of creativity away from the very technical mind, and the burden of kind of technical and structure away from the creativity to sort of try and get the best results.
Yeah, would you say it almost would you say that that routine, that structure, almost like quite logical mindset? I so straight away start thinking like accountants, and yes, that's not creative at all. Would you say that kind of kills creativity, or actually in your case is like enabling it?
I think it enables it. Is like the idea, the ability to sort of, I structure my personal creativity in a way. It's like, I go, it's almost a step-by-step thing. Is like and it's a classic kind of, exploration, bring it back to, but by having that, you've got a certain time, and I time limit things, and but this is, I think, the commercialization of creativity is, and it's I hate that experience. I hate was that, but that's essentially what it is architecture is that, you can't just keep going without an output or without a result at the end of it, and that's sort of, it's the trick. It's behind the whole thing.
You're right. So when you're designing workspaces, is that more of a science view, like a psychology? Is it more of like a good taste and put colours and textures together?
Oh, I think it's a complete combination of it all. But I think, I mean, for me, and that's why I enjoy kind of this thinking about how people work and how they do their daily tasks and things like that, is about the psychology. It's about and for me, because of where I come from and kind of how ingrained a culture is, and it's about the sociology. It's about kind of, understanding a culture is really interesting. And I mean, particularly now, you're kind of smashing a lot of cultures together in one place, in a workplace, to be, and to be able to kind of decipher from an individual point of view and from a collective point of view of what this I mean, no space behaves like a workplace. It's a really, the length of time that people spend in it, the goal to, I guess, be productive in a space that can influence that productivity is such an interesting kind of concept. It's like, what is the best environment for people to thrive, and not just in their work. I hate the word productivity. Thriving is about kind of enjoying. It's about wellness. It's about, but the output is something that is excellent and is done well. And I think, everyone's looking for that at the end of the day in terms of what they do.
What's a funny thing I always find with workplace is people say you get that those you work with and you spend more time with your colleagues and you do with your family, and all of that's true. But you actually go through quite a lot of like challenges for good and bad. And like you got to work through stuff with people that you don't really know. Their background could be anything. Actually, it's a melting pot for like fireworks in a sense. Isn't it? Absolutely. In that sense, it's very, you're very high pressure. It's how all has different cultures,
different, neurodiverse type elements to it. There's just physical kind of elements to it. So it's really interesting to sort of create a space that caters for so much of a diverse thought, or just people in general, and trying to kind of move it all, like kind of capture that single purpose.
Yeah,
because that's what a company really is a company has a strategy and a philosophy and all of that sort of thing, and the workplace is an enabler to have everyone buy into that.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. And also it changes all the time. The cultural makeup changes all the time. The ebbs and flows of the people in a business, and how an environment kind of reacts to that. I think, obviously COVID was a big kind of like, whoa, what's happening here? And it was a pivot point. But the reality is, I mean, we're doing our latest global study now, and it's coming out that basically everyone still wants the same thing that they wanted pre-COVID. So the reality is, if we did, they want environments that kind of suit the work that they're doing. And I mean, it's that kind of basic. It's like that do the same things. The COVID was a distraction. It's sort of, like, I think everybody wanted to sort of make a solution to something. But the reality is that we're back in an environment where it's not that different. People want the same things from the workplace, and it is, they want space to do the best job that they can do. They want that, the home life is definitely kind of integrated into it. That's a different layer, as in terms of that hybrid working and things like that. But the reality is, the workplace is not, the demands of the workplace is still, I want somewhere to focus. I want somewhere to sort of just do the best job I can do, and in an environment where with my peers, and that we can kind of innovate and do all of these things. But I think in the last sort of 5 years, we've been sort of, oh no, it's this and it's this and it's this and it's this. But the reality is, I think it needs to adjust. It needs to be flexible, and it always has. It always has, because of the work environment, the people who are there change.
I was thinking that, like, even if, like, for Unispace, for example, if someone else is in your position, the team would look different. It wouldn't be the same because leadership is going to be different. People are going to take it differently and apply it differently. And do you know what I mean? It does take one person can change a business.
Yeah, and I mean that's the thing is, we've all seen kind of new CEOs come into big companies, and then all of a sudden there's a different philosophy. It's a different thing. Some people buy it, some people don't. Like you do all of these types of things. I mean, Unispace has evolved massively over the last. Well, I've been here 9 years.
I haven't really touched on that. You went straight into the whole like cultural heritage. Yeah. So you were in architecture before that, though.
Yeah, so I work for traditional architecture companies. So I mean, look, in New Zealand, so I mean, there's kind of a big, I guess, 3 or 4 in New Zealand of the really kind of big architectural companies, very, very structured in an architectural way, and no construction, no project management. They were just that. And I spent probably the first kind of 6 years of my career in really traditional architectural companies, and then I did my own thing for a couple of years with a friend, and then completely went off pace for a little bit, but then decided that actually trying to find work wasn't really my ambition. It was really just to do good work and, lead teams and things like that. So it was an interesting prospect at the time, Unispace, because the whole design and build it wasn't a thing in New Zealand at the time. So we were sort of designing something for a country that didn't know what it was really. And it's interesting because, Unispace sits in between this sort of very, I guess, D&B type approach and then the traditional architecture. And the idea is that, it's sort of designed for a client in mind. It wasn't really designed to, the NZIA process or the REBA process is, very structured, and it's structured around the process of architecture, construction and things like that. The idea around this was how do we structure a process that is literally just for the client? So how do they get the best of all of these kind of both worlds? This idea that you get the best architectural designers to do what you want to do, and you get the best project managers and the best construction team to do everything under one roof. And which is an interesting kind of idea to me, because I sat in a traditional time. I was an architect, and it was always sort of a bit of a battle, sort of the process, because you're dealing with an external kind of project manager, an external construction company, and you're trying to have a dialogue and guardianship this design to the end. And it's valid in certain aspects, and I think my rigor came from being that kind of an architect or that kind of a designer. And then it was just felt new and interesting at Unispace to sort of go into a market that did not understand it and create something. And when I started sort of thing in Auckland, it's like 22 people entirely.
It's a proper startup. So.
Yeah, and that's what it felt like. That's what was interesting. It was entrepreneurial. We were kind of inventing it as we went, because processes were, we're kind of like, sure, that could work. And it was a really and it felt like a collective kind of something that we were all in on. It was, it was like, we're all doing this and we're moving in this direction. And this is it was a really exciting time. We were the underdogs and everything. We were competing against my old companies and things like that for design. And then we were saying it, and it was like, we started with a design team that was from a lot of them were from that traditional world and brought into kind of Unispace. And then we had to rethink what we were doing and all of those sorts of things. But we started to kind of get some really key clients like BNZ, one of the biggest banks in New Zealand. a part of Australia and things like that. And we started off little. We started off doing these kind of little design jobs, and then we're like, but we can build it too, and we can kind of do this. And we built ourselves into, I think when I moved here, there was about 100 in New Zealand people, and we were doing, all the banks. So Westpac, BNZ, ASB, all of these, ANZ, all at the same time. We'd built this reputation for being really great designers, and we're up there with those, those kind of big people, but we built it too, and that was always what was there. It was like, we'll make your life easier because you don't have to deal with anyone else. One of the old directors, he was, you get one butt to kick. You don't have to. That was his favourite sell point. And in New Zealand, that didn't exist. It wasn't really a thing. But for a procurement or a property person sitting at a bank, dealing with multiple consultants and multiple type things, it's like, oh, brilliant. And you're dealing with the quality people the whole way through, and that's I think what was. So what is, they're still, one of our most successful countries.
New Zealand. Why is it?
Yeah. But is that, I think it really came from an entrepreneurial, really like, sure, we'll do that. Or, like there was never any really kind of no. And it was interesting because probably a couple of years before I left, we stopped being the underdogs, and it was sort of more fending of things like that, which changes a dynamic. Really, it's really interesting to go from sort of a this huge celebration every time we won something, because it was near impossible to kind of go from being these people that no one knew existed into these type of rounds, and then it became that we were a given, and then when we when you lose, it's like, what? And so it's interesting, but I think that's the day I got to a point where we sort of built something amazing. It was time to do something else, and it was either a job change and a life the same, or a life change and sort of a similar job but in a different status. Yeah.
But you must have seen incredible transformation from startup made to now it's a global brand, and been in Amsterdam, you've been in London, yes, doing Europe. I mean, what's one thing that if you were to go back and change, and what's one thing that didn't work or you wish you didn't do? Or
I kind of don't see it like that. I think, we had a really, we have Unispace is still quite entrepreneurial. We're always still thinking about like what is the needs. It's a slightly, here it's a different environment. London has a D&B culture. But it's just a change in thought process, I think, that kind of understanding where we sit and things like that. But I think, we're still quite entrepreneurial. We're still thinking about kind of the future. We're still, and I don't think we have a really strong lessons learned culture here as well. It's like nothing's wasted. If something didn't work, we'll work out why it didn't work. We'll understand sort of and adapt. I think that's what's so nice about, and this is why I've been here 9 years, really, is like, it doesn't feel like the same day every day. It's, and also it's like, all right, it didn't quite work. Let's just change it. Like, we're not there, and you're not stuck in a sort of a very, a corporate kind of mindset. Is these the rules and that's how you do it and things like that. It's like, and what's interesting about here is, we've got lots of different new leaders and things like that in the business who come with different things, and being kind of like, oh, okay, well, let's try that, and that's the thing is like, I think having such an interesting and diverse design team and their ability to actually just adapt is amazing. Like, I think it's a hard thing to do, but I think our adaptability makes it interesting, particularly in workplace environments, particularly in being very client focused. We're not dealing with one client here. This is, every individual client means something different to us, but also we know that they have and a company has an entirely different personality and a different way of doing things. So, we have a huge emphasis on that strategy upfront, kind of understanding who the people are, who we're designing for, and we haven't lost any of that, which is that's what keeps things interesting for me. Is like you never, although you're kind of designing a workplace and there are certain elements that are the same, but we don't have a house style. We're not trying to kind of influence someone into doing, what we think. It's really about understanding them and the nuances of how they do things and who they are and what their brand is and all of those sorts of things and doing. So every project is completely different, which is, and we deal with global kind of enterprise, accounts and things like that. But I think we always inject some local into that. It's like, and we may be given a big brand guidelines and a big workplace guidelines, so it has to be this and this and this. But if it's in Paris, it's got to feel like Paris.
Globalization and like.
Exactly. And it's a part of that kind of embracing that culture is that I think nobody wants to work for a faceless brand. They want to have a personal experience in the workplace. They don't want to just feel like they're in a company factory. It's definitely not what.
I agree. Antonia, you are so interesting. I've literally got so many more questions about Ed. Like, I could literally do this all again and for another, like, we've reached over time, but hadn't even started to tap into, like, design and, like, this whole globalization and how we sort of interact with people's psychology and all that. Honestly, there's so much, but you have covered, I love the whole, like, cultural heritage and whole hospitality, but in a broader sense, and the rituals and routine and how that enables creativity. I love that. And then the story and the transformations Unispace from 9 years ago and that kind of whole free, like, can-do entrepreneurial spirit, like, to hear all of that straight from you when you see that's a tremendous change is
amazing. It's just change is a given. Like that thing is how you react to it and like what your agility. I think that's it's all about being agile and not there's no point resisting.
No, just over the pipe.
To be fair, it's an opportunity to do something interesting. It's like as soon as something changes, it's like, oh, hang on, what does that mean? Let's do something else.
I do want to ask though, is there a book or a podcast you recommend?
I listened to something today actually. I guess I bike to work and home again every day, and I'm listening to a podcast. So I'm listening to podcasts for at least an hour a day, bang and forth. I mean, it's an interesting kind of thing. One of my sort of go-to ones. I mean, there's This American Life. I'm an old school podcast. Listen to all of this, but at the moment, I'm interested. Like, I'm listening to like Armchair Expert, but I listen to the expert kind of episodes where they talk to people who are experts in what was the last one was twins. What's this thing too? Twins, an expert in twins, and then there's been an expert at what was like so many different elements of the culture, and it's very specific. And they talk about these experts are from completely like I would never even think there would be experts in, but it's so interesting to hear. I love hearing what people are interested in. I love hearing kind of psychopathy. Someone was talking about like what's like to be a psychopath, and it was an expert, but she was a psychopath, so she was talking it from this really interesting perspective. And I think everybody has these preconceived ideas about what things are, but these experts, I like the diversity of having just someone quite random that I would never have thought about tell me about something about this culture, about the world, and about specifics about human behaviors and people, things like that. So that's what I'm listening to every now and again.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate you jumping on. Appreciate your time. this is a bit of a juggle to get booked here, but
Well, yeah, that's what happens when I travel around a lot.
yeah, don't worry. It's amazing. It's definitely been worth it. So no, I really appreciate your time, and everyone. Thanks for listening in. As always, we really appreciate the ratings, the followings. It helps us get more great guests like Antonia on this show. And we really start to pick into these minds of like leaders and key influences within workspace design. And I mean, who doesn't love that? So thank you very much. But you can say that.
Thank you. It's been great.